Now, the recent death of Sunday Times reporter Marie Colvin and French photographer Remy Ochlik in Syria made the headlines around the world, and that included here in China. The American Committee to Protect Journalists said that in 2011, 43 journalists were killed around the world, while the French-based NGO Reporters Without Borders put the figure at 67. And it says that so far this year, 12 more reporters have died. That's the figure so far for 2012. Other organisations with broader criteria put the number for reporters killed in 2011 at more than 100. The majority of the deaths, of course, occur in areas of civil or military conflict or where there is political instability. The extensive coverage of the two journalists' deaths in Syria and the narrow escapes of several more journalists has stirred up quite a bit of discussion in the Chinese online community about the role of journalists and particularly war correspondents in these dangerous situations. So how do Chinese posters view this perilous profession, and what's the situation of Chinese war correspondents? Well, to get an idea of what's being said in the online community, let's now join our researcher Esther Dung in the newsroom. First off, Esther, can you give us an idea of Chinese posters' impressions and thoughts about these journalists, known as war correspondents, in general?
Well, based on the comments I've seen, it seems a lot of posters here truly respect this group and are expressing their admiration and appreciation towards them. First, we have Kang Xi-Wang, who says on QQ.com, "These journalists aren't afraid of political power and even the threat of death. I do admire them." And also Qi Wu Bu Luo Mu, who says, "The war correspondents are really great. They manage to tell the truth to the whole world and call for peace at the expense of their lives." And this poster on cnxianzai.com seems to have quite a deep understanding of this profession. These war correspondents are often caught in a dilemma. On the one hand, people criticize them for winning wealth and fame by peddling war news, while on the other hand, they themselves suffer from the frustration that they actually can do little to change the cruelty of war, even though they have done so much coverage from the front line. Not many people can understand this. And Alon Moore emphasized the great importance of these war reporters. For example, Ren Yue remarks on bjnews.com.cn. "Some of these war reporters never made their way back home. They knew the job was dangerous, but they also knew it's their duty to write down what's happening on the battlefield. What they have left for us is to think carefully about how to face up to war." And this anonymous poster on QQ.com refers to the two journalists recently killed in Syria, saying, "Marie Colvin lost one eye 11 years ago on the front. Now she has lost her life. But her and Ochlik's deaths have made the international community pay more attention to the civilians in Syria. They are gone, but their insist on never hiding the crimes of war and exposing the torture victims stay with us." And finally, Qin Xuan published an article in the Southern Weekend newspaper in which he says, "The cell phone and the internet have made many places in the world become more and more transparent. But still, it's impossible for everybody to enter the war zones and upload their reports online. So we need brave war reporters to let us know what's happening on the battlefield." And he also added, "Nowadays, the media have become part of war, and their coverage can even determine the direction of the war to some degree. For example, laying siege to a small town in the desert isn't a big deal. But if it becomes headlines on the BBC, CNN, or influential newspapers, this small town will certainly soon grab the world's attention, and with it, therefore, the attention of decision makers from all around the world."
Okay, it seems no shortage of praise for the war correspondents here anyway. What's the situation of this profession here in China, though?
Well, that's a pertinent point. Lots of posters here firmly believe there aren't any war reporters in China in the real sense of the word, even though some media organizations, especially the state-owned news agencies and the national broadcaster, do send special journalists to areas where fighting is happening. Actually, for many Chinese people, only Lu Qiulu Wei, better known as Rose, a Hong Kong journalist who has visited several areas of conflict, including Iraq and Libya, can be considered a war reporter due to her coverage of the situation on the battlefield, even though some critics still argue that she's far from qualified as a war reporter. Zhan Jiang, a very famous Chinese professor on journalism, says bluntly on iPhone.com, "China has no real war reporters, not a single. They never really stay on the battlefield. They are just the hotel warriors. And interestingly, I've also come across a recent article in the Nanguo Morning Post newspaper, which lists a number of famous Chinese war reporters. But all the reporters it mentions worked during the 1950s or even earlier. Meng Youyu的爸爸 on infcm.com mentions another aspect of war reporting in China, news censorship. I just feel so ashamed at our journalists. They dare not report the truth, only the news that has been facelifted. Meanwhile, He Jingjun is a bit more indirect in the Changjiang Business Daily. If a country's media always use foreign sources when reporting a war, it's a humiliation of that country's media organizations. And sometimes investment in war reporting is related to a country's economic power. On the world list of reporters killed, it's always the US, UK, and France that rank at the top. But not everybody is so pessimistic. Fang Kecheng, a journalist working for the Southern Weekend newspaper, has seen some progress. Nowadays, more and more Chinese media organizations, not only the state-owned news agencies and television stations, but also some commercial media organizations also have war correspondents. It shows that we are making progress.
Okay, finally, Esther, I guess nobody will argue that war reporting is an extremely dangerous career choice, but this is something that is argued by editors all over the world. Where to draw that line regarding risking a reporter's life or getting the story? Is a story worth a journalist's death? What's being said about this?
Well, a certain number of posters do bring up this aspect, and many of them think that life comes above any news coverage. For example, this poster says on infcm.com, "It is the reporter's duty to get news to the public, but no information is valuable enough to be at the expense of one's life. I know some people will argue that when the interest of the public surpasses that of the individual, the latter should make a sacrifice. But for me, life is still the most precious." Well, for a lot more, life is more valuable than news coverage. But on most occasions, it's simply not that easy for the war reporters to make a choice. The Southern Weekend, the newspaper I just mentioned, had an interview with Anders Magnus, a reporter from Norway National Radio and Television Stations, who spent over 10 years in Africa. And he said, "There's no doubt that it isn't worthwhile of being killed when reporting from the battlefield. But the problem is you never know when and where you will be killed. I firmly believe that no report is more valuable than a human life. But as war reporters, we have to enter the battlefield and try to show what's happening there, especially to the victims of the war." And Fa Yan Wujing remarks, "Without these devoted war reporters, we will never know the truth. But the expense of knowing the truth is too bloody and too expensive." Finally, Hei Wuya puts forward this rather thought-provoking approach. "If we have to exchange people's lives for the truth, then it shows that we still have a long way to go to reach civilization."